Modern civilization manages global economic supply chains and builds quantum computers, yet we consistently display the tribalism and moral reactivity of toddlers. This contradiction exposes a flaw in how we are taught to think about human psychological growth. Standard sociology maps development as a straight vertical progression, climbing from primitive to conventional to advanced. But this linear concept fails to explain how a brilliant aerospace engineer can hold the ethics of an extremist. The human mind doesn't climb a single ladder. In the mid-20th century, researcher Clare Graves identified that human development navigates a much more complex, multivariable space. His work was later expanded into the psychological framework known as spiral dynamics, which categorizes the evolution of human value systems. To accurately diagnose an individual or an entire society, we must drop the two-dimensional ladder and map the psyche across a four-dimensional coordinate matrix. Instead of a staircase, picture human development as an empty geometric void waiting to be mapped. The first variable we need is stages. This represents the vertical baseline, the maximum cognitive capacity an entity has to take on wider perspectives. The second variable introduces lines of development. These are independent vectors, like emotional, moral, or interpersonal growth, that progress at entirely different speeds. The third variable accounts for states. These are temporary shifts in consciousness, ranging from deep sleep to sudden meditative epiphanies. The final variable maps types. These are horizontal categorizations, like a masculine focus on autonomy versus a feminine focus on connection, which exist at every stage of growth. Predicting human behavior is only possible once you account for how an individual's stage, line, state, and type converge in a single person. Let's build the vertical y-axis, stages. A stage dictates the radius of a worldview, evolving from egocentric survival up through pluralistic global integration. Spiral dynamics color codes these thresholds. For example, the blue stage represents an ethnocentric perspective focused on strict rules and authoritarian tradition. Over time, that rigid structure allows for the emergence of orange, a world-centric perspective driven by scientific rationality. Eventually, the hyper-individualism of orange hits its limits and gives way to green pluralism, expanding the circle of concern to marginalized groups and the global ecosystem. The most common analytical trap is assuming a person or a nation exists entirely at one of these single-color stages. In reality, every entity operates from a center of gravity. This is a weighted statistical average of multiple stages active simultaneously. A person's center of gravity might be 50% orange, spilling over into 25% green and trailing 25% blue. They process most of reality through logical self-interest, but retain dogmatic beliefs and a developing sense of progressive empathy. Psychological growth is a messy, incremental shift of this entire statistical distribution upward over decades. Applying a single stage label to a population or an individual is imprecise and results in inaccurate predictions. Measuring someone by a single vertical stage is too simplistic. We have to extrude that y-axis outward into a three-dimensional plane consisting of different developmental columns. We can define these columns as lines of development, independent psychological skill trees. Leveling up one line does not automatically level up the others. Consider the difference between cognitive development, the processing power required to understand complex reality, and moral development, which determines the radius of who you actually care about. An individual can push their cognitive line to highly advanced rational stages like orange or yellow, while completely neglecting their moral line, leaving it at a primitive, egocentric red stage. This extreme structural lopsidedness is the mechanism that creates dangerous, narcissistic dictators. They possess the logistical genius to build empires, combined with the empathy of a predator. The inverse scenario is also common. An individual can possess incredibly high moral development, exhibiting world-centric care, but lack the interpersonal or cognitive lines required for political logistics. We see this in highly revered spiritual figures who display immense compassion but possess minimal influence over complex economic or structural systems. Measuring a person's intelligence provides zero guarantee of their ethical behavior. Human dysfunction is almost always a symptom of severe asymmetry across these independent developmental lines. The third variable we must overlay onto this structure is states. Unlike permanent stages or lines, states are temporary neurological shifts in consciousness that occur regardless of your developmental baseline. These range from everyday states like waking and dreaming to profound, fleeting states of grief or even sudden mystical experiences. Here is the critical distinction. A religious fundamentalist at a low stage and an advanced systems thinker at a high stage can both experience the exact same peak mystical state. However, their permanent structural stage determines how they interpret that temporary state. The fundamentalist weaponizes the vision to prove their specific dogma. The systems thinker integrates that same vision into a holistic worldview. Finally, we apply types. These are horizontal personality categorizations that color how you express whatever stage you occupy. Take the masculine versus feminine types. At any stage, a masculine type prioritizes individual rights and autonomy, while a feminine type prioritizes care and network connection. When you layer temporary states and horizontal types over permanent structural development, you see why two people at the exact same stage of life will manifest wildly different behaviors. Zooming out, this four-dimensional matrix provides a map for observing the developmental trajectory of civilizations. The structural rule of this evolution is a concept called transcend and include. When an entity moves to a higher stage, it must leave behind the destructive elements, but it absolutely must integrate its functional infrastructure. Advanced societal empathy, the green stage, cannot exist without the logistical supply chains established by orange capitalism, and that orange capitalism cannot function without the strict rule of law by the blue stage. This exposes a common trap, romanticizing primitive, low-scale stages. It is easy to look at ancient tribal structures and assume they were inherently more peaceful than modern society, but primitive solutions fail when scaled to millions of people. High-density populations require advanced structural solutions to organize resources and avoid destroying their environment. The fatal error a society can make is skipping stages or destroying underlying systems out of ideological purity. If you destroy orange economic infrastructure because you judge it greedy, the progressive green social programs built on top of it collapse. To truly elevate global consciousness, advanced individuals cannot simply judge less developed populations. They must actively help them build up their lower stage infrastructure first. Evolution is cumulative. You cannot parachute high-stage social structures into systems lacking baseline infrastructure, and you cannot dismantle the past without